Sarah Mitchell's heels clicked confidently across the marble courthouse floor, creating a rhythm that matched her racing heart. The morning sunshine streamed through the towering windows, casting long shadows that danced alongside her determined stride. At 32, she had already made partner at Henderson and Brooks law firm, an achievement that still brought a smile to her face every morning she pinned on her golden partner's badge. Today's case seemed routine, a property dispute that would typically take no more than a few hours to resolve. Yet something felt different about this morning. Perhaps it was the extra cup of coffee she treated herself to, or maybe it was the way the security guard had done a double take at her perfectly tailored Armani suit and pearl necklace, both presents she bought herself after her recent promotion. The weight of her leather briefcase felt reassuring against her palm as she navigated the busy corridor. Inside were meticulously prepared documents, each page representing hours of careful research and preparation. Sarah had always believed in being over-prepared, a habit that had served her well since her days at Yale Law School. "Morning, Ms. Mitchell," called out James, the elderly janitor who had worked at the courthouse for 3 decades. His friendly greeting brought warmth to her expression. "Another big case today." "Every case is big when justice is involved, James," she replied with a wink, their usual morning exchange bringing comfort to her pre-trial routine. She appreciated these small moments of connection in the often impersonal halls of justice. As she approached Courtroom 7A, Sarah spotted her colleague Thomas rushing past, his tie slightly askew. "Judge Barrett's in rare form today," he whispered as he hurried by. "Already dismissed 2 cases for tardiness." The warning made Sarah glad she'd arrived 45 minutes early, though she hadn't known Judge Barrett would be presiding today. Inside the courtroom, Sarah began her usual preparation ritual. She arranged her files in perfect order on the rich mahogany table, each document coated with colored tabs for quick access. Her client would arrive soon, and she wanted everything to be perfect. The early morning light filtered through the high windows, creating an almost theatrical spotlight on her workspace. Taking a deep breath, she inhaled the familiar scent of polished wood and leather that permeated the courtroom. Her fingers traced the smooth surface of her lucky pen, a graduation gift from her grandmother, who had always believed Sarah would change the world one case at a time. The memory brought strength to her shoulders and lifted her chin just a bit higher. A rustle of movement caught her attention as other attorneys began filing in. She noticed their curious glances and professional nods. After 7 years practicing law in this courthouse, Sarah had earned a reputation for handling complex cases with remarkable skill. Today's property dispute might seem simple to others, but she knew that every case deserved her full attention and expertise. The court clerk, Mrs. Thompson, approached her desk with a slight frown. "Ms. Mitchell, there's been a last-minute change in the documentation requirements," she whispered, sliding a paper across the table. "Judge Barrett's new policy." Sarah quickly scanned the document, her mind already adapting her strategy to accommodate these unexpected changes. Flexibility had always been one of her greatest strengths. As the clock ticked closer to 9, Sarah stood to adjust her suit jacket one final time. The pearls at her neck caught the light, reminding her of her mother's words. "Elegance is not about being noticed, it's about being remembered." Today, she felt both elegant and prepared, ready to represent her client with the dedication and skill that had become her trademark. Little did Sarah know that this seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning would become one of the most memorable days of her career, and that Judge Barrett's courtroom would soon be the stage for an unexpected turn of events that would change not just her life, but the entire atmosphere of the city's legal community. The heavy wooden doors of Courtroom 7A swung open precisely at 9 o'clock, and Judge William Barrett's commanding presence filled the room before he even stepped inside. Everyone rose in unison, the rustle of suits and shuffling of papers creating a nervous symphony. Sarah straightened her spine, feeling the weight of the moment settle around her shoulders. Judge Barrett's reputation preceded him like a storm cloud. His silver hair caught the morning light as he ascended to his bench, his wire-rimmed glasses perched precisely on his nose. The gavel struck with practiced authority, the sound echoing through the now-silent courtroom. "Be seated," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years on the bench. Sarah reached for her first document, her fingers brushing against the carefully arranged files. A small paper clip had come loose, causing 2 pages to stick together. As she carefully separated them, the sound seemed to amplify in the quiet courtroom. Judge Barrett's eyes snapped to her table, his gaze sharp and unforgiving. "Ms." He paused, consulting the docket. "Mitchell, is there a problem with your documentation?" His tone carried an edge that made several attorneys shift uncomfortably in their seats. Sarah maintained her composure, years of experience steadying her voice. "No, Your Honor. Simply ensuring everything is in proper order," she responded professionally, her words clear and measured. The judge's frown deepened, creating new lines across his forehead. "Time is this court's most valuable resource, Ms. Mitchell," he declared, his voice rising slightly. "And you appear to be wasting it." The words fell heavy in the silent room. Sarah felt the eyes of every person present fixed on her, waiting to see how she would respond. A junior attorney 2 rows back dropped his pen, the plastic clatter against wood breaking the tension momentarily. Judge Barrett's attention snapped back to Sarah. $500, he announced, the fine falling from his lips like a verdict. "Perhaps that will encourage better preparation in the future." Sarah's heart pounded against her ribs, but her expression remained neutral. She had faced challenging moments before, but something about this felt different, more personal, more pointed. The fine was unusually harsh for such a minor delay, and the whispers starting to circulate around the courtroom confirmed her suspicion. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins, "I appreciate the court's time and—" But Judge Barrett cut her off with a sharp wave of his hand. "The fine stands, Ms. Mitchell. Shall we proceed, or would you like to continue depleting the court's valuable minutes?" The sarcasm in his tone was palpable, drawing a few nervous coughs from the gallery. Sarah squared her shoulders, channeling the strength that had carried her through law school and countless trials. She opened her perfectly prepared brief, her grandmother's pen steady in her hand. "Ready to proceed, Your Honor," she replied, her dignity intact. The morning continued with a tense atmosphere hanging over the proceedings. Sarah presented her arguments with precision and grace, each point articulated clearly despite the judge's frequent interruptions and challenging questions. Other attorneys in the room exchanged glances, their expressions mixing concern with admiration for her composure. As the morning session drew to a close, Sarah noticed the court reporter, Mrs. Jenkins, giving her an encouraging smile. The small gesture reminded her of all the times she had overcome obstacles in her career. This was just another challenge to navigate, another story to tell someday. Judge Barrett declared a lunch recess, his gavel striking with particular force. As the courtroom began to empty, Sarah remained at her table, reorganizing her documents for the afternoon session. She didn't notice the young woman who had just entered through the back door, or the way Judge Barrett's expression suddenly changed when he saw her. The morning's tension was about to transform into something entirely unexpected, and the $500 fine would soon become the least surprising event of the day. The courthouse cafeteria buzzed with its usual lunchtime energy, but Sarah opted for the quieter sanctuary of the third-floor corridor. She settled onto a polished wooden bench beneath a towering window, sunlight warming her shoulders as she reviewed her afternoon notes. The morning's tension had left a knot between her shoulder blades, but years of courtroom experience had taught her to channel that stress into sharper focus. She pulled out her phone to check her messages, pausing to smile at a text from her mother wishing her luck today. As she typed a quick response, the sound of quick, excited footsteps echoed down the marble hallway. Sarah didn't look up, assuming it was just another lawyer rushing to meet a client. "Sarah Mitchell, I can't believe it's really you." The voice carried such genuine joy that Sarah's head snapped up immediately. There, practically bouncing down the corridor in designer heels, was Catherine Barrett. Her dark hair was swept into a sleek bun, her face lighting up with the same infectious smile that had made them instant friends in law school. Catherine. Sarah stood, her papers sliding forgotten onto the bench. "What are you doing here?" The two women collided in a tight embrace, Catherine's perfume bringing back memories of late-night study sessions and shared dreams of changing the world through law. "I'm here to have lunch with my father," Catherine explained, pulling back to look at her friend. "He's been so busy with cases lately that I practically had to schedule an appointment." She laughed, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. "But what about you? Last I heard, you were closing that massive merger case downtown." Sarah's smile faltered slightly as she thought about her morning in court. "Actually, I'm here on a property dispute case, in Courtroom 7A. She watched as Catherine's expression shifted, curiosity dancing in her eyes. 7A. That's my father's courtroom, Catherine said, her head tilting slightly. "Wait, were you there this morning?" The 9 o'clock session. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but neither woman had yet grasped the full picture. Just then, the sound of a door opening caught their attention. Judge Barrett stepped into the corridor, his robes exchanged for a crisp suit jacket. He paused mid-stride, taking in the scene before him. His daughter embracing the very attorney he had fined that morning. "Catherine, I see you've arrived early for lunch," he said, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty that Sarah had never heard in court. His eyes moved between the two women, confusion evident in his expression. "Dad." Catherine beamed, keeping one arm linked through Sarah's. "I can't believe you didn't tell me Sarah was appearing in your court today. Remember all those stories I told you about my brilliant friend from Yale? The one who tutored me through constitutional law and stayed up all night, helping me prepare for the bar exam." Judge Barrett's face paled slightly, his usual stern demeanor cracking as realization dawned. Sarah felt the implications of the moment settling around them like dust in sunlight. "Ms. Mitchell," he said slowly, his eyes now seeing her properly for the first time. "I wasn't aware you and Catherine were acquainted." "We were roommates for 3 years at Yale, Dad," Catherine continued, oblivious to the growing tension. "Sarah's the friend I've been telling you about for years. The one who graduated top of our class, remember? The one who organized that amazing legal clinic for underprivileged families." The corridor fell silent except for the distant ticking of the hall clock. Sarah stood perfectly still, her professional mask firmly in place despite the surreal nature of the moment. Judge Barrett's expression cycled through surprise, realization, and something that looked remarkably like embarrassment. Catherine glanced between them, finally sensing the undercurrent of discomfort. "Did something happen this morning?" she asked, her grip on Sarah's arm tightening slightly. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the marble floor as 3 lives unexpectedly intersected in ways none of them could have predicted when the day began. Judge Barrett's private chambers felt smaller than usual as he sank into his leather chair, the weight of the morning's events pressing down on his shoulders. Catherine had practically dragged both him and Sarah inside, insisting they needed to talk. The antique clock on his desk ticked loudly in the heavy silence. "Dad, you seem strange," Catherine said, perching on the edge of his desk like she used to do as a child. "What happened this morning?" Her eyes darted between her father and her friend, trying to piece together the puzzle of their obvious discomfort. The judge loosened his tie slightly, a rare gesture that betrayed his unease. "Catherine, perhaps you could give me a moment to speak with Ms. Mitchell," he began, but his daughter's determined expression stopped him short. "Sarah," Catherine corrected gently. "Her name is Sarah, Dad. The same Sarah I've mentioned at every family dinner for the past 5 years." She reached for her phone, quickly scrolling through photos. "Look, here we are at graduation. And this one's from when she helped me move into my first apartment. Oh, and remember when I told you about winning that mock trial competition? Sarah was my partner." Each photo felt like a small hammer tapping away at Judge Barrett's carefully constructed professional walls. There was Sarah, younger but unmistakable, arm in arm with his daughter at various celebrations. Her smile in the photos was exactly like the one she'd maintained this morning, even as he'd imposed that fine. "The pro bono program you're always praising me for starting at my firm," Catherine continued, her voice growing more animated. "That was Sarah's idea. She implemented the same model at Henderson and Brooks 2 years ago. Remember how impressed you were when I told you about it?" Judge Barrett's hands folded and unfolded on his desk, his gold wedding ring catching the afternoon light. "Ms. Sarah," he corrected himself, turning to face her directly. "I'm beginning to realize I may have made some assumptions this morning." Sarah sat perfectly straight in her chair, her professional demeanor still intact despite the surreal situation. "Your Honor, there's no need to," she began, but Catherine interrupted. $500, Dad. Really? She had finally pieced together what had happened, her legal mind quickly assembling the clues. "For organizing papers, when you let Mr. Peterson ramble for 20 minutes last week about his dog's birthday." A flush crept up Judge Barrett's neck as memories of the morning's interaction replayed in his mind. He remembered the way other attorneys had shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the way his clerk had avoided eye contact after imposing the fine. He thought about all the times Catherine had spoken about her brilliant friend Sarah, the mentor who had helped shape her legal career. "I didn't make the connection," he said quietly, each word carrying the weight of realization. "All those stories about your friend Sarah from law school, your roommate who helped you prepare for the bar exam, the person you said inspired you to become a lawyer in the first place." The afternoon sun slanted through the window blinds, creating strips of light across his desk that seemed to point accusingly at him. A framed photo caught his eye. Catherine at her law school graduation, beaming proudly. He'd never noticed before, but there in the background was Sarah, celebrating alongside his daughter. "Dad," Catherine's voice softened, seeing the distress on her father's face. "Sarah's the one who convinced me not to quit law school during first-year finals. She's the reason I'm a lawyer today." She moved to stand behind Sarah's chair, placing her hands on her friend's shoulders. "She's also the person who taught me that true justice requires us to look beyond our first impressions." The implications of the morning's events hung heavy in the air, challenging years of unconscious assumptions and habitual judgments. Judge Barrett's courtroom had always been a place of strict order and swift decisions, but now, facing the intersection of his professional and personal worlds, he realized that sometimes justice required a deeper look beneath the surface. The afternoon session began with a different energy in Courtroom 7A. Judge Barrett sat at his bench, outwardly maintaining his usual stern demeanor, but inwardly seeing everything through new eyes. His gaze lingered on Sarah as she rose to continue her presentation, her composure unwavering despite the morning's events. As Sarah spoke, artfully laying out her client's case, the judge found himself noticing details he had overlooked earlier. The meticulous organization of her documents, the same attention to detail Catherine had always praised, the way she quoted precedents from memory, just as his daughter had described her doing during their late-night study sessions, the respectful way she handled opposing counsel's objections, the very quality Catherine had mentioned admiring most about her mentor. A memory surfaced. Catherine at Sunday dinner 3 years ago, excitedly sharing how her friend Sarah had just made partner at Henderson and Brooks. "Youngest partner in the firm's history, Dad," she had exclaimed. He remembered nodding absently, more focused on his pot roast than his daughter's story. Now, watching Sarah command the courtroom with quiet confidence, those dismissed stories came flooding back. Mrs. Jenkins, his longtime court reporter, caught his eye briefly. She had worked with him for 15 years and could read his moods better than anyone. Today, she saw something different in his expression, a softening around the edges, a thoughtfulness replacing his usual swift judgment. "Your Honor," Sarah continued, her voice clear and measured. "The precedent established in Thompson v. Richardson clearly supports our position." She referenced a case he had presided over 5 years ago, analyzing his own decision with remarkable insight. It was the kind of thorough preparation he had always demanded, but rarely acknowledged. The afternoon light shifted through the high windows, casting a warm glow across the courtroom. Judge Barrett found himself remembering another conversation with Catherine just last month. Sarah's handling a property dispute case soon, she had mentioned over coffee. She always says that property law isn't just about buildings and boundaries. It's about people's dreams and futures. At the time, he had dismissed it as youthful idealism. Now, listening to Sarah eloquently connect her client's case to human impact, he recognized the wisdom in those words. She wasn't just presenting legal arguments. She was telling the story of a family's hopes tied to a piece of land, their future wrapped up in property lines and zoning regulations. The judge's hand moved to the breast pocket of his robes, where he kept a small photo of Catherine on her first day of law school. He had been so proud that day, seeing his daughter follow in his footsteps. Yet here was the woman who had helped make that dream possible, the friend who had supported Catherine through every challenge, standing in his courtroom, the same courtroom where he had treated her with unwarranted harshness just hours ago. Between arguments, he noticed how other attorneys in the room nodded appreciatively at Sarah's points. Even his clerk, usually impassive, seemed impressed by her presentation. The morning's fine now felt like a weight in his chest, a reminder of how quickly he had judged based on. What exactly? The question uncomfortably echoed in his mind. As Sarah concluded her arguments, Judge Barrett realized something had shifted fundamentally in his courtroom. The authority he had wielded so rigidly that morning now felt different, not diminished, but transformed. Through Sarah, he was seeing not just the law, but its human impact, its potential for both justice and growth. The same sun that had witnessed the morning's tension now illuminated a changed atmosphere. Judge Barrett straightened his robes, knowing that the next motion he would make would require more courage than any decision he had rendered in 30 years on the bench. As the last echo of the gavel faded from the afternoon session, Judge Barrett didn't immediately rise from his bench. Instead, he watched as Sarah gracefully gathered her materials, her movements unhurried despite the day's emotional toll. The courtroom slowly emptied, the usual end-of-day shuffle of papers and whispered conversations filling the air. "Ms. Mitchell," his voice carried across the nearly empty courtroom, softer than his usual judicial tone. "Would you join me in my chambers?" He caught a glimpse of Catherine slipping in through the back door, right on cue, as if she had timed her arrival perfectly. The walk to his chambers felt longer than usual, each step echoing with the weight of unspoken words. Catherine walked between them, her presence bridging the gap that morning's events had created. Mrs. Jenkins, the court reporter, offered an encouraging smile as they passed, somehow sensing the importance of this moment. Inside his chambers, the late afternoon sun painted everything in warm amber tones. Judge Barrett removed his robes for the first time that day, carefully hanging them on the old oak coat stand his wife had given him 20 years ago. The action made him feel more human, more father than judge. "Please, sit," he gestured to the comfortable leather chairs facing his desk. Sarah and Catherine settled in, while he remained standing, gathering his thoughts. Family photos lined his bookshelf. Catherine's graduation, family vacations, moments of joy and pride. His eyes lingered on a recent edition. Catherine receiving an award for her pro bono work, the very program Sarah had inspired. "Sarah," he began, deliberately using her first name, "I owe you an apology." The words felt foreign on his tongue. In 30 years on the bench, he had rarely admitted to a mistake. "This morning, I acted hastily, and," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "without the wisdom I demand from others in my courtroom." Catherine reached over and squeezed Sarah's hand, a gesture that spoke volumes about their friendship. Sarah sat straight-backed but relaxed, her expression open and attentive. "Your Honor," she began, but he held up a hand gently. "William, please, at least in this room." He moved to sit on the edge of his desk, something he hadn't done since Catherine was a child coming to visit him at work. "My daughter has told me countless stories about you over the years, about your kindness, your brilliance, your dedication to justice. I realize now that I failed to connect those stories to the attorney standing in my courtroom this morning." A small smile played at the corners of Sarah's mouth. "Catherine has shared many stories about you too," she said softly. "About your fairness, your commitment to justice, your support of her dreams. That's why this morning surprised me so much." Judge Barrett nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. "The fine," he said, reaching for his checkbook. Sarah raised a hand to stop him. "Keep it," she said firmly. "Donate it to the law school scholarship fund, Catherine. And I started last year. Let it help another student achieve their dreams." The suggestion hung in the air for a moment before Judge Barrett smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "You know," he said, looking between Sarah and his daughter, "I've been considering starting a mentorship program for young lawyers. Perhaps you both might be interested in helping me design it." Catherine beamed, bouncing slightly in her chair like she used to do as a child. "Dad, that's perfect. Sarah just mentioned wanting to do more mentoring, didn't you?" The tension that had filled the courtroom that morning had transformed into something else entirely: possibility, understanding, growth. Through the window, the setting sun cast long shadows across the city skyline, marking the end of a day that had begun with judgment, but was ending with promise. 1 month after the memorable day in Courtroom 7A, the changes in Judge Barrett's courthouse were subtle but significant. The morning sun streamed through the windows as usual, but it illuminated a different atmosphere. The judge's new mentorship program had launched with surprising success, attracting eager young lawyers from across the city. Sarah sat beside Judge Barrett at the head of the conference table in the courthouse's main meeting room, reviewing applications for the program's next round. Catherine had arranged the meeting during her lunch break, her enthusiasm for the project infectious. The stack of applications had grown thicker each week as word spread through the legal community. "This one shows promise," Sarah noted, sliding a folder across the polished table. "First-generation law student, working full-time while attending evening classes." Her finger traced the candidate's journey, reminiscent of her own path years ago. Judge Barrett nodded, remembering how Sarah had worked through law school while mentoring Catherine. The door opened as Mrs. Jenkins poked her head in, smiling at the unlikely trio. "Judge, your 2 o'clock is here, but I had to share something first." She stepped inside, holding a local legal journal. "Have you seen this month's feature article?" There on the cover was a photo of Judge Barrett, Sarah, and Catherine, standing together in Courtroom 7A. The headline read, "Innovation in Justice: How One Judge's Change of Heart Transformed a Courthouse." The article detailed their mentorship initiative, praising its impact on young lawyers and the broader legal community. "Dad, you're becoming famous," Catherine teased, taking the journal and flipping through pages, though they didn't mention your excellent taste in ties. The light moment carried the warmth of their strengthened relationship, professional respect now intertwined with personal understanding. Judge Barrett adjusted his glasses, a habit that once signaled stern judgment, but now suggested thoughtful consideration. "The program's success isn't about me," he said, glancing at Sarah. "It's about recognizing talent and potential in unexpected places." A knock at the door introduced Marcus Chen, a first-year associate selected for the inaugural mentorship group. His nervous energy reminded Sarah of her younger self, standing before Judge Barrett that fateful morning. "Your Honor, Ms. Mitchell, Ms. Barrett," he greeted them, clutching his portfolio tight. "Marcus," Sarah smiled warmly. "Perfect timing. We were just reviewing the expansion plans for the program." She gestured to an empty chair, inviting him to join them. The young lawyer's eyes widened at being included in such a meeting. Judge Barrett watched as Sarah expertly put Marcus at ease, drawing out his ideas with the same skill she used in the courtroom. Catherine added her perspective, creating a bridge between experience and fresh enthusiasm. The judge felt a profound sense of rightness, seeing how their different strengths complemented each other. The afternoon light played across the table as they worked, highlighting the changes in the courthouse's culture. Junior attorneys no longer hurried past Judge Barrett's courtroom with lowered eyes. Instead, they sought opportunities to learn, encouraged by the example set in Courtroom 7A. Later that day, as Sarah prepared to leave, Judge Barrett noticed her pause by the courthouse steps. "Something on your mind?" he asked, falling into step beside her. "I was just thinking," she smiled, "about how one morning can change everything." She gestured to a young lawyer hurrying past, arms full of files. "A month ago, she might have been afraid to even look up. Now she's one of our most promising mentees." The setting sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps, but unlike the shadows of judgment that once filled these halls, these were shadows of growth, of change, of possibility. As they parted ways, Judge Barrett realized that his courtroom had become more than a place of law. It had become a place of transformation, where justice was served not just through verdicts, but through understanding and opportunity. 6 months after that fateful morning in Courtroom 7A, the courthouse gardens hosted a celebration that no one could have predicted. Under a bright autumn sky, Judge William Barrett stood at a podium, addressing a gathering of legal professionals from across the city. Behind him, a banner announced the first graduating class of the Barrett-Mitchell Mentorship Program. Sarah sat in the front row, her proud smile matching Catherine's as they watched the judge speak. His voice carried across the courtyard, stronger and warmer than it had ever been in his courtroom. "When I began my career on the bench," he said, adjusting his reading glasses, "I thought justice was about swift decisions and strict adherence to protocol. One morning changed everything I thought I knew." The audience shifted forward in their seats, many knowing the story that had become something of a legend in legal circles. Among them sat Mrs. Jenkins, the court reporter who had witnessed it all, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Beside her, Marcus Chen beamed, now a confident second-year associate and one of the program's success stories. "True justice," Judge Barrett continued, "requires us to look beyond our first impressions, to see the potential in every person who enters our courtroom." His eyes met Sarah's, sharing a moment of understanding. "Sometimes the greatest lessons come from our biggest mistakes." Catherine reached over and squeezed Sarah's hand, just as she had done countless times during their law school days. In the past 6 months, their friendship had grown even stronger, now enriched by their shared mission of mentoring the next generation of lawyers. After the ceremony, as attendees mingled over refreshments, Judge Barrett found himself surrounded by young attorneys who once would have avoided his gaze. They asked questions eagerly, shared their experiences, and spoke of their dreams for the future. Sarah watched from across the garden, remembering the stern judge who had fined her that morning half a year ago. "Ms. Mitchell," a soft voice interrupted her thoughts. A young law student, Emma Torres, approached with nervous energy. "I read about how you handled the property dispute case in Judge Barrett's court. Would you tell me more about your approach?" Sarah smiled, gesturing to a nearby bench. "Sit with me, Emma." As they talked, she noticed Judge Barrett watching them, a knowing look in his eyes. He had just finished mentoring his own small group, his former reputation for harshness replaced by one of wisdom and guidance. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Catherine gathered her father and Sarah for a photo. "For the next article," she teased, positioning them near the garden's blooming roses. "Legal Times is calling it the partnership that changed the justice system." A bit dramatic, don't you think? Judge Barrett chuckled, but his eyes held pride as he looked at the program graduates mingling in the garden. Each one represented a story of growth, determination, and possibility. Sarah straightened his tie, a gesture that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. "I don't know," she smiled. "Sometimes dramatic changes are exactly what we need." The evening light caught her pearl necklace, the same one she had worn that transformative morning. As the sun set over the courthouse, casting a golden glow across the gardens, Judge Barrett, Sarah, and Catherine stood together at the entrance. The building behind them had witnessed their journey from conflict to collaboration, from misunderstanding to mentorship. Next year's program already has twice as many applicants, Catherine announced, scrolling through her phone. We might need a bigger courtyard. Judge Barrett placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder, his gesture full of respect and gratitude. You know, he said thoughtfully, sometimes the finest moments in law have nothing to do with verdicts or precedents. Sometimes they're about the hearts we change along the way. Sarah looked up at the courthouse, its windows reflecting the evening light. What had begun as an ordinary morning in Courtroom 7A had rippled out to touch countless lives, transforming not just a courthouse, but the very meaning of justice itself.